So we have both front and rear ends of our buggy complete. Everything is super nice and free, very impressed with the quality so far. And now it's time for our buggy to finally take shape with bag K. Time to start assembling the buggy to the main chassis. An all new chassis for this buggy, which is wider with various recesses for electronics and so on to be attached slightly lower on the buggy than usual. Quality looks top notch as we'd expect from Tekno, with the underside having a large number of countersunk screw holes for the large number of screws in our next kit bag, bag K. So in this bag we have all the screws required for mounting both front and rear end to the chassis, as well as mounting several other pieces, namely the aluminum center drive shaft, chassis braces and center differential housing. We're going to start with the front center brace, and with it in position on the chassis we insert two 12mm flathead screws from the underside to secure it in place. We're going into plastic here, so no thread lock required, although don't over tighten enough to strip any threads. With that done we can position the entire front assembly into place, although first we need to loosen the front bumper mount since it will key into the chassis. And with the front end in place we can secure the steering assembly onto the front chassis brace we just installed using a single 12mm button head screw. After which we tighten down the front bumper. Notice how it grips and keys onto the front of the chassis. Now we can begin securing from the bottom, so we'll start with two 10mm flathead screws going into the steering posts. Remember the steering posts are metal, so we need to use a little thread lock here, after which we move up to the next two screws, 15mm flathead screws straight in, no thread lock required. The next two 12mm flathead screws, and finally the last two 20mm flathead screws. And with that, the front assembly is now secured to the chassis. We'll move to the center differential and the metal center diff mount next, line it up on the chassis and secure it in place with three 10mm flathead screws. Although it's not mentioned in the manual, as we're screwing into metal, I like to use some thread lock here. And once secure, we can attach the rear chassis brace pieces. The larger piece with two 12mm flathead screws, and the rear piece with two 10mm flathead screws. Reach for that center differential that has been patiently waiting since bag A and insert the center drive shaft between the front differential and the center before lowering the diff into place into its mount, and covering the top half of the diff mount before securing into place with three 12mm cap head screws and one 12mm button head screw in the top right corner. A quick check and everything is nice and smooth. Now we're ready to install the entire rear assembly, taking care to ensure the small dog bone feeds into the rear of the center differential, before turning over to secure from the bottom. Starting from the rear, we insert two 20mm flathead screws, followed by two 12mm flathead screws, and two 15mm flathead screws. All that's left is to finish off with the rear chassis brace with these two pieces, which connect to each other with the only 18mm caphead screw left in the kit bag, before lowering into place from the top of the buggy, and securing with two 12mm button head screws from above and into the rear assembly, and finally a 12mm flathead screw from the bottom. And that's it. Both front and rear assemblies installed and secured to the main chassis, as well as the front and rear chassis braces and the center differential within its housing. Much of this is new with this buggy: a new wider chassis, a new motor mount, new center diff mount, as well as all the chassis braces. Everything has come together perfectly without any problems at all. We need to move on to building our shocks with the next two kit bags, which we need to build from scratch too. So let's move on to the next step with bags L and M.